This teriyaki pork jerky is way better than any beef jerky I've had from the store. With a superior flavor, a dirt cheap price point, and the ease with which you can whip it up, there's no way I'm ever again paying for a bag of jerky from the store. And the only thing standing in my way from having the best jerky of my life is the humble, though versatile, hot box everyone has in their kitchen. I've covered before why pork tenderloin is a staple in my diet. It's a lean and cheap cut of meat that can be used a million different ways. Today I'm adding jerky to its long list of uses. Pork tenderloin usually comes in a pack of 2 strips, and if you buy them fresh, you can toss them in the freezer for 4 hours to let the tendies firm up a bit. Makes for easier slicing. Oh, and would you look at that? Less than $6 for 2.5 pounds. Try beating that in beef prices. I love this fine cut of meat, not only because you can often get it cheap, but because it's so high in protein and extremely low in fat. Makes trimming it a breeze. I cut off the lopsided ends and used my knife to peel away what bit of fat and silver skin is on the muscle. Fibrous and a little too chewy, this tendinous tissue is better removed than left on the future jerky slices. But I personally don't mind a bit of it. After cleaning up the muscle, I have it to yield shorter jerky strips, and having been partially frozen for 4 hours prior, I'm able to make quick work of slicing the muscle into about a 1/4 inch thick slices. The goal here is to get these decently uniform, but from all my testing, a slightly too thick or too thin piece isn't going to spoil the bunch. That being said, it's pretty easy to just smash a thicker piece into conformity. It's foolproof. Okay, now onto the marinade. Soy sauce carries most of the weight in this teriyaki recipe, so 80 grams or roughly 6 tablespoons of that go into a bowl, along with 15 grams or 1.5 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar, and of course honey at 30 grams or about 1.5 tablespoons. For spices, I like to use a bit of ground ginger, a 1/2 teaspoon, 4 grams or 1 teaspoon of black pepper, the more the merrier in my opinion, 2 grams or a 1/2 teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes for that spicy kick, about a 1/4 teaspoon of onion powder, maybe 1 gram or so, and 2 teaspoons or roughly 12 grams of salt. Believe it or not, the soy sauce doesn't actually make the meat as salty as you might think. It just helps impart that familiar umami flavor. When it comes to salting my food, I generally find that 1 teaspoon of salt per pound of meat is sufficient. Even in the case of making jerky, this rule seems to hold true. Given a good whisk and a taste, this teriyaki marinade is ready to go to work. I just mix around the marinade with my hands, making sure to cover the entire surface area of the pork. Wrap that up and let it chill in the fridge for anywhere between 30 minutes to overnight. Turning my attention to the real MVP, my oven needs some quick prep to work its magic. Top rack should be on the second highest point, bottom on the lowest point. This next bit is critical for an easy clean up later. 1 baking sheet goes on the lower rack with either a sheet of parchment paper or aluminum foil to cover it. Sliding that in for now, I turn my oven to the lowest temperature that it can manage. You can see that there's no marking for it, but I'm shooting for a temperature between 150 and 175 degrees Fahrenheit or 65 to 79 C. A low temp is crucial for drying, not cooking the meat. I take the marinated meat out of the fridge and it just smells so good. If you know me, you know that I'm cheap. I don't like buying a bunch of specialized kitchen gadgets that are only good for one thing. It costs too much money and leads to too much clutter. Plus, anyone can show you in a YouTube video how to use a mandolin and an expensive food dehydrator to make pork jerky. But are you going to go out of your way to buy a mandolin and food dehydrator just to make jerky? I don't think so. At least I'm not. Keeping a bit of distance between each slice of meat, roughly a 1/2 to 1 inch, should keep them from sticking together as they dehydrate. Bear in mind that the longer you let the meat marinate, the less of a mess this process ends up being, because the more the marinade gets sucked up by the pork. Before, when I've only marinated the meat for 30 minutes, I would have a drippy teriyaki mess on my hands by this point. Pulling out the 2 racks, I lay the meat kebabs over the top rack one at a time, making sure that the meat slices are free to dangle between the rungs of the rack. I adjust individual slices as need be and slide everything in, keeping that drip sheet directly below the meat. Airflow is critical to proper dehydration. That's why I make sure to leave the oven door ajar by about 1 inch or 2. Putting something in the door that won't melt or combust from the low temperatures, like a wooden spatula, helps to ensure that the moisture that leaves the meat has a place to escape. About 1 hour later, I like to check on the kebabs and make sure that I unstick any of the meat that might have started to dry onto the rack. I find that wiggling the skewer at different points is usually all that's needed. After a total of 4.5 to 5 hours later, the pork has been sufficiently dehydrated and my apartment smells heavenly. Interestingly, only a bit of rendered fat ended up on the drip pan. Don't worry, I tasted it. Again, there's more drippage the less time you let the meat marinate. Don't freak out if this is not the case for you. A bit of a wiggle and a pull and the jerky comes out of the oven. A quick scrub of the rack is all that's needed to clean up any mess. Now for the hard part. De-skewering the jerky without eating any of it. Almost impossible. Ravenous de-skewering ensues, and more quality assurance testing of course. Something worth noting is that even with this meat being as low in fat as it is, there's still bits of rendered fat on its surface. While tasty when fresh like this, fat goes rancid. To ensure that these meat sticks make it for the long haul, I rub them between some paper towels to remove a bit of the fat. And the final product is one to fall in love with.
Daddy, chill.